Welcome to this webinar. This is part of the mnemonic webinar series, and I'll be going through how to protect your endpoints using Argus Endpoint Responder. My name is Noah Jue, and I've been working with mnemonic for over 6 years. Most of my time is spent on tinkering with EDR, more specifically implementation from a technical standpoint, as well as building internal documentations, procedures, as well as providing training. Apart from that, I'm also part of the Security Operations Center as part of a second line or third line duty. And in addition to that, I'll also work as a part of the on-call duty outside of working hours. Let's see. So I'd just like to remind you that if you like what you see and like the content of our webinars, please do follow us on our LinkedIn page or check out our websites at mnemonic.no/webinars for future webinars. Additionally, you may also subscribe to our YouTube channel. So the challenges with the remote workforce. So I'm just listing out a few examples of some of the challenges that may arise when you are using remote workforce and things that you may want to consider. With moving clients outside of your network perimeter, you'll typically see a less visibility, especially on the network layer, due to the clients, as mentioned, being brought outside of the organization network. Your network sensors may not typically be able to monitor traffic that's outside unless you actually force the traffic through your network, for instance, by using a VPN. And clients are not necessarily as well protected when outside to the same degree when it's inside your organization network. VPN split tunneling is one of the challenges that may arise in that regard. So VPN split tunneling is when you have an endpoint that is communicating not just to your organization through the VPN, but also has some part of the traffic going outside and directly and straight onto the internet. That may be something you are missing from your detection. Usually, the security situation in home offices is not really up to par. You may have home routers that are not even regularly patched or even at all. And some of them may be even misconfigured so that the endpoints are exposed directly onto the internet. And we've seen examples of this in our security operations centers, where we've seen exploit attempts successfully reaching the endpoints due to misconfigured home routers. Also, typically the home networks are flat. Every device can talk to each other, and that just brings in just another vector of attack that and risk. And so, can you really trust the devices on the home network? For instance, Internet of Things, washing machines, robot vacuum cleaners, television, and not least smartphones. It's by having the endpoints outside of your organization, it's more difficult to facilitate for a quick analysis and forensics. And so, for instance, it would make traditional response on let's say, for instance, forensics far more tedious and time-consuming. You have to bring in the endpoint, and then you have to start from there. So, what do you do if an endpoint is infected or compromised? Do you have any procedures in place to take care of that? And do we forbid the user from using an endpoint? And how will you recover from that infection or compromise and start working again? So you need to balance out the needs for balance out the risks against the user's needs to be an ability to work remotely. So, what is EDR? I've just included a quote from Gartner with their definition of what an EDR is, and I've highlighted the main characteristics of an EDR. So, record and store endpoint system level behaviors, and the ability to detect on those mentioned behavior. Provide contextual information, like for instance, which users has been observed on the endpoint and what kind of IPs has been assigned to the endpoint. And the response part containing the incident at the endpoint, which typically is network isolation of some sort or some other kinds, and as well as other response capabilities aiding the remediation process. So just this is just mostly a reiteration of the last slides, but a bit more structured. So on the left-hand side, we got detection key capabilities, with the first 2 points being already mentioned, the ability to record system endpoints events and providing detection on top of that. And so it's very important that detection mechanisms is flexible enough to function and work in a day-to-day operations, but also for incident response and more heavy-duty engagements. And so it's important, with the third and highlighted point, that the endpoint data must be available to the analysts in an easy-to-access manner, preferably through a good graphical interface with a good query language, but also through API access or some sort of raw access for the more experienced and analysts that really want to dig into the raw data and do their own processing and really dig around and do threat hunting and really dig out those security incidents. And this is just to highlight the point that data is not data that's not readily accessible for the analysts is not really that useful at the end of the day. On the right-hand side, we got response capabilities, and so already mentioned is the isolation capability, being able to isolate endpoint typically through, again, the network. You'll still retain in contact with the EDR platform, so that you can still perform action and analysis. So you may also lift the isolation in case you determine that it was just a false positive. So that's taken care of. Next point, direct access to the endpoint, typically through some kind of shell access, which makes it possible to browse the file system, which is very useful when you're looking for web shells, acquire specific files, and deployment of execution of tools that may aid in the analysis. And lastly, the remote triaging and forensics capabilities, the ability to do it remotely and quickly. This lowers the threshold for performing a more in-depth analysis, even when you're remote. So this is just a fictional scenario for the purpose of showing you how the EDR analysis may unfold. Please note that this scenario is rather simplified and that the analysis often includes far more data that needs to be sifted through in order to understand the true core chain of events that has happened on the endpoint. So imagine that you have received a notification from your National Cybersecurity Center telling you that they've observed some traffic towards an IP address that has been associated to a known threat actor, and that you may want to investigate that. Now, without an EDR, your first course of action may, in terms of analysis, would probably be to investigate network-based logs, logs like firewall logs, proxy logs, NetFlow, etc., and hopefully that everything in a CM, which makes it easy and collected. Now, with an EDR, it is possible to track down the responsible process for the network activity. So in this case, you'll see a y.exe, which has been run from a temporary location, Windows/temp, which makes it rather suspicious. In this case, we made it rather obvious due to the icon choice that this is a malicious executable. Traveling along the process tree reveals that the process responsible for executing this malicious code is PowerShell. And if you look through the process activity, you may find that this PowerShell process has been in contact with Dropbox, which is a legitimate cloud file sharing service, but in this case may have been used for maliciously used to distribute malware. Again, looking further up the process tree, you may find that Word has been involved in executing WScript, which indicates the presence of VBA scripting and possibly macro, and even exploit code. And yeah, that indicates that a user probably has opened a Word document of some sort. And lastly, if you dig even deeper, you may find that the Word document that has been opened by Word was written to the file system by Outlook.exe. Now now we have enough information to make a hypothesis, or at least an assumption, that a user has opened a phishing email containing an attachment with a Word document. That Word document was opened and subsequently executed some code using W script, executing PowerShell, which fetched some kind of code or content from Dropbox, ending with the malicious code being executed and contacting the malicious IP that was the original trigger for the investigation. Now you have enough information to perhaps start doing some kind of remediation, or at least start preventing further damage. You can start looking into where the email came from. Has any additional users received the same email? You may want to delete that, or at least inform the users to be aware of that. And perhaps consider other types of measures that could prevent this kind of infection chain from happening again. But perhaps more importantly and more interestingly, you'll find that with EDR, you have the ability to look into what happens after the fact, or the after infection and compromise has occurred. What did the malicious code do? Is there any other consequences of the infection? Do I see evidence of manual operation, manual operators in your network, which could indicate a more targeted type of attack? Do we see exfiltration or login credentials being misused and in control? These are quite a few questions that you may be able to answer using EDR, which is far more difficult using other types of analysis tools. So going back to the one of the first slides where I mentioned the challenges with having a remote workforce and how EDR can help you with that. So by having an EDR, you increase the visibility on the endpoints, especially on the network part, given that you are actually at the endpoint. So for instance, end-to-end encryption is not so much of a big problem at the endpoint. The traffic has to be decrypted at some point, and before the endpoint can actually start using that type of information. So you'll be able to see at least what the activity resulted in. You're at the source of the activity. At the end of the day, network is just a carrier of information to and fro between the endpoints. And so being at the endpoint enables you to see the actual activity. And I also mentioned VPN split tunneling as a issue in terms of moving endpoints outside of the network organization network. And that, again, is not a problem, because with EDR agent at the endpoint, you'll be able to see the traffic regardless of how it actually leaves the endpoint. Now, EDR is unfortunately not a magical silver bullet that can solve bad security at home. But what it can do is enable you to make use of a model called the zero trust model, in which you decide that there is no inherent trust on anything outside control or visibility, and then assume everything outside of that to be bad. Now, using this model and strategy, EDR is absolutely one of the key components in that to gain visibility and high degree of control at the endpoints. But it's not the only component, so take note of that. And I will also like to mention that with organizations going more and more into the cloud, that start deploying their services into the cloud, moving away from the more traditional on-premise data centers with a clearly defined perimeter, which makes the traditional perimeter more blurry and less defined, making it difficult to decide how you're actually going to defend this. And EDR is one of the ways you may address those kind of issues. EDR also makes analysis, forensics, and incident response a lower friction affair, at least relative to most other alternatives. The threshold for lowering the threshold is lowered for analysis, so the analyst may more quickly and readily jump into analyzing a incident that may originate from the EDR project itself or outside of it. And this is due to the more lower associated cost with speed and general threshold and difficulty in gaining the necessary data to perform the analysis. And so questions like, did the user run a certain executable file? Which process contacted evil.com and what did it do? Questions like that are, again, more swiftly and precisely answered with the data that EDR provides. And for more secure, severe security incidents, existing EDR coverage will make a huge difference in shortening the time spent on analysis. Mnemonic has experience with incident response, and there's a stark difference between when our analyst is engaged in those kind of incident response engagements, and having EDR and not having EDR is a huge difference. So Argus Endpoint Responder is our mnemonic service offering on top of EDR solutions, and I'll be going through what that kind of includes and entails. So the service can be divided roughly into 3 parts: 24/7 analysis and incident verification. We'll do the analysis and we'll do the proper escalation and handling of those alerts. We'll also do correlation on the events outside of EDR. This is especially true if you got other components in our Argus portfolio. Let's say, for instance, network analysis and log analysis will, of course, correlate between those events, making the alerts not just for EDR, but originating from all parts of our portfolio and service more robust and precise with EDR data. Mnemonic can also offer management of the central platform of the EDR solution, if applicable. And the reason for that is not all EDR solution requires management. Some EDR vendors takes care of that themselves. And then content development, triage, analysis, and threat hunting. We in Mnemonic, we build tooling and add to the detections as we go, and it's just part of the service. And for instance, we may do a large sweep of across all of our Argus Endpoint Responder customers when we receive endpoint level indicators from one of our threat intelligence partners. And this is included in the service. So these are the 3 EDR solutions Mnemonic offers. Mnemonic offers Argus Endpoint Responder service on top of. Some time ago, Mnemonic did an evaluation with not just these 3, but several EDR products, and based on a few set criteria, the choice landed on these 3 in specific. FireEye Endpoint Security, previously known as FireEye HX, Microsoft Defender Advanced Protection, commonly abbreviated to MDATP. It's quite a long name after all. VMware Carbon Black EDR, previously known as Carbon Black Response. Now, Mnemonic can, of course, if you already haven't chosen one, Mnemonic can help you choose the right solution for your needs, depending on your situation and priorities. And we will follow you through the implementation process if you need it. I will not be spending too much time in explaining the differences between them, so do reach out to us if you'd like to know more information about that. And so at the end of the day, our customers can choose one of these 3 EDR solutions, and we all support all of them. And all of them are good choices for EDR. But each of them has their specific focus and advantages that separates them. So making the choice based on your priorities is the way forward. So this is just a slide to show you how a very, very simplified flow of analysis would appear and play out if you have our Argus Endpoint Responder service. And so you may start with, at the left-hand side, there's a number of alerts with different severities. Not all of them are truly interesting to look at. Some of them are just informational. And even some of the higher alerts, higher severity alerts may not require follow-up at the customer's end. And so the alerts are analyzed, and only the interesting alerts that requires follow-up will result in an incident alert going out to the customer. So firstly, the first liners will analyze the alerts and will, of course, notify the customer or enrich the existing alerts if need be. They've all received training in EDR analysis, and the first liners will handle the case if there isn't anything critical or complex about the incident. For alerts that require more in-depth and complex analysis, those alerts are escalated to a second liner or a third liner during daytime, and an on-call analyst outside of regular working hours. People who fill these roles are more experienced analysts, and they often have forensics expertise or deeper knowledge in EDR analysis. They will, of course, the same as the first liners, create an incident alert if appropriate, and also deploy response capabilities when needed. It could be to limit the potential damage and ready the endpoint for further activities. And I would also like to add that if an incident reaches this point, the customer, depending on the agreed policy, will often be notified by phone as well to ensure that the case is being handled in a timely fashion. And lastly, before I proceed to the next slide, I would like to just tell you that this overview may look rather simple, but the staff of all of these roles, and we have over 100 people in operations to have this work 24/7. So you have the availability of a first liner for the preliminary analysis and more experienced analysts 24/7. This is one of the key points of value that Argus Endpoint Responder adds on top of EDR solutions. So I'd like to just take you quickly through how an implementation process may work out. So Mnemonic has a proven and robust implementation process. And for those customers, and for the customers of ours, you've already been part of that. And so it's not just for EDR, but also for the rest of our products. And we've integrated all of these mentioned EDR solutions we offer our services on, so we have first-hand experience in dealing with them. Mnemonic can also, as mentioned, if you haven't already picked out an EDR solution, we can help you and assist you in differentiating between the different EDR solutions and share our experiences in using them from a management point of view, but also analysis point of view, the strengths and weaknesses, and so on. The implementation process is set up in a way that we, as much as we can, minimize the workload for our customers. Mnemonic will do the heavy lifting in configuring and getting the content up to date, installation, and etc., keeping the life cycle of the product up and running. And so in terms of the area and division of responsibility, Mnemonic will take care of the installation and management of the platform, again, if applicable. The integration with Argus, our SIEM platform, as well as a case management platform, as well as a SIEM custom or third-party CM if it's supported by the EDR solution. And of course, the analysts, which are trained in EDR analysis. They provide the actual analysis of the alerts and will alert and follow up on those cases. So the customer only needs to think about the endpoint agent in itself. And so the customer needs to install the agent and keep it up and running and up to date. Also ensuring it's communicating properly back to the backend. And that's everything the customer needs to take care of. And just to wrap up and summarize, what is the value in Argus Endpoint Responder? As mentioned, 24/7 analysis, day, night, weekends, holidays, doesn't matter. It's all the time. And that analysis is performed by trained analysts, and you have the availability of the trained analysts, not just for the service itself, but also for ad hoc needs, if relevant. For instance, smaller analysis tasks or larger engagements in those cases. As mentioned, the management of the platform, again, you only need to take care of the endpoint agent in itself, and Mnemonic will do the heavy lifting and keep the rest of the platform up and running. Argus Endpoint Responder shortens the distance from when an alert is triggered until it's fully remediated. That may include a full incident response. Yeah. And lastly, we increase, or we like to think that we increase the usefulness and utilization of an EDR solution. So EDR solutions are not they have really great capabilities and interesting use cases, but it of course increases the cost, which makes it even more important that the EDR solution is utilized to its fullest extent, and ARG's Endpoint Responder may help you with that. Thank you for your time. If there are any questions or anything, please do not hesitate to contact us. Again, follow us on our LinkedIn page, or visit mnemonic.no/webinars for future webinars. Thank you.